Hello and welcome to Moneylife. This is Sucheta Dalal. This week, we naturally talk about the Adani Bribery scandal. But I have a little different take because you've heard everything there is to hear about it. You heard about the arrest warrants against Gautam Adani and his nephew. You've heard that there is action from the Securities and Exchange Commission. It's civil action and criminal action and arrest warrants from the Department of Justice, New York office. But the one silent factor in all this is SECI, or the Solar Energy Corporation of India. This is a central government PSU. And the Power Ministry, all this, the bribery scandal, 5 states cannot happen without the Power Ministry at least being aware of what is going on, isn't it? Don't you think their silence speaks volumes? So in all the uproar that has happened, as I kept saying, the Solar Energy Corporation is completely silent. I've sent them an email. If they answer, we will talk about it again. But basically, the policies of SECI are at the heart of the criminal proceedings in the US. And I'll tell you why. One, did SECI know about it? Were these policies designed to create problems? Look at it in the context of the statement by Total Energies of France. It has said very clearly that it will not make any new financial contributions to the Adani Group. We don't know whether there were any new financial contributions in the offing, but it's a signal that it is sending out. Now, the minute it said that, shares of Adani Green plunged 11%, went up again a little, but closed 8% lower on 25th November. This is not just because of Total Energy's statement. It made one more point. It said it was not made aware of the existence of an investigation into the alleged corruption scheme. And that is at the heart of this, because this investigation dates back to 17th March 2023, when the US Federal Bureau of Investigation conducted raids in the US and seized some electronic devices from which they put together the whole bribery scheme, because there were emails on it, there were PowerPoint presentations, there were WhatsApps, exactly who they spoke to, that is Gautam Adani and his nephew. So it was Sagar Adani's electronic devices that were seized. And this is the basis on which the whole case built in the US has happened. Now, not only did the Adani Group insist that there was nothing, that it was all lies, baseless, and malicious, their favorite statements repeatedly. They even say it's defamatory, as though threatening defamation action. But it persisted with these lies a year later, in March 2024, when Bloomberg published a report which said the US is probing Indian billionaire Gautam Adani and his group over potential bribery. That article is very detailed. It talks about SEC and the Department of Justice investigation. But again, it carries this line about how it's all baseless, false, defamatory, and what have you. In fact, details of what happened and how Sagar Adani was raided are there in this image that we are showing you. It says the search warrant identified offenses, individuals, and entities under the United States government rules. So it is not just the two, it is also several of their officials. Now, there are 2 sets of documents. One is a criminal 54-page investigation by the Department of Justice. There is another 41-page summary by the US SEC, which actually puts it out like an interesting story. Here's a link. Those of you who are interested in details of the sordid saga can read it over here. Question again raised by what's put here is, was SEC in the dark about the reasons for the abrupt reversal by state utilities, which suddenly agreed to pay inflated prices? Now, to understand that, let's look at the sequence of events. Go back to 2021. Adani Green Energy, under the leadership of Gautam Adani and Sagar Adani, says the SEC, orchestrated a bribery scheme involving hundreds of million dollars. In fact, the Department of Justice calls it 265 million very precisely, to secure power purchase contracts for Adani Green. Not directly, they would be with SECI. Now, these contracts were key to the Adani Group's ambition to establish itself as the world's largest private solar producer. Adani Green had raised $750 million through a corporate bond offering in 2021. This included $175 million from US investors. This now is the key. The minute you raise money from US investors, the US government says it should be clean, there should be no bribery involved, and you have to make mandatory declarations that you followed by all the rules, there's no corruption, you did not bribe anyone. And people think this is routine checkbox stuff, as happens with our corporate governance filings, and they make these declarations. The US government, however, takes this seriously every once in a while and does a serious investigation in which several Indian companies over the past decades have paid up hefty fines. So, were Indian companies not aware of the stringency of FCPA? Of course they were. Should they have been careful? Absolutely. Did the Adanis make false declaration? That's what the SEC and the Department of Justice says. In fact, they say that even when they were making these declarations to raise 175 million, they had hatched an elaborate plan to bribe power distribution companies, or what are called discoms, to sign power purchase agreements with SECI. Now, the key here is it is not agreements between SECI and Adani Green directly when it comes to solar power purchase. What has to happen is that the distribution companies have to sign up with SECI, which is a central PSU. SECI in turn will have agreements to buy power with Adani Green and one more company. And those agreements are very profitable. And signing those at those rates depends on whether state distribution companies or discoms agree to pay a high enough price. Now, initially, all states said, no way, we are not going to pay so much because ultimately we, the consumer, pay that price. Then they did an about turn and they were willing to pay a much higher price. According to the US government, it's because of the bribery deal. Now, SECI had a strange, hybrid, unique contract with what are called solar power developers. They were supposed to construct plants in India, which would produce solar power components. They would manufacture solar cells, modules, wafers, which are required to produce solar power. They also would have solar power generating capacity. In exchange for them putting up these plants to manufacture components, SECI would purchase power generating capacity from these developers. These kind of contracts were called manufacturing linked project contracts, since they combined power generation and the manufacture of solar components. Who came up with this brilliant idea? We don't know. If you came up with this idea, why so expensive? Was it viable? And if it's not viable, if states are not willing to pay that higher price, especially when solar energy prices are falling, then why go ahead with it at all? These are questions that have to be asked. And remember, Adani Green was not alone. There was another company called Azure Global Power, which also bagged a contract for Andhra Pradesh. Now, the Adanis approached this company and said, you also are going to benefit, so participate in this scheme. They agreed to pay 30%. How did they pay it? Not as cash, but they surrendered the rights to one Andhra Pradesh project to Adani Green on the pretext that it was unviable. So before all this happened, Adani Green's revenues were approximately $50 million US, and it had not recorded a profit. But according to analysts, the minute this SECI deal is done, which is states agree to buy the power, sign up with SECI, SECI in turn has a deal with Adani Green and Azure, then the two companies, especially Adani Green, stood to earn $1 billion in profits alone. But there was a catch. It was linked. So the profit, the high profit that would be earned by Adani Green and Azure would materialize only if the state distribution companies purchase price at a high enough tariff. So that agreement had to happen first, and hence the bribery, and hence meeting various state governments. SECI would then buy the power, which would enrich private companies, and this would go on for 25 long years. Which were the states? Andhra Pradesh, the biggest, which also got the biggest bribe. In rupee terms, 2,000 crore, of which the bulk of it, 1,750, went to Andhra Pradesh. There was Odisha, there was Chhattisgarh, there was Jammu and Kashmir, and there was Tamil Nadu. Many of these states have issued denials. We're not going to go into that because after the denials, there is again talk about Andhra Pradesh re-examining these power purchase agreements. Like I said earlier, initially they were reluctant to pay above market rates. They were thinking about their consumers, which is us. After a while, they did an about turn when the bribery scheme apparently rolled out, and they are suddenly willing to commit to higher prices. Key to the problem, I repeat, is that SEC had agreed to pay energy prices to Adani Green, which were way too high. This is a central government utility under the Ministry of Power. Why on earth would it agree to tentatively pay these prices without clarity or viability or a discussion with the states? It has to start with the states, not with the private companies. It has to first establish that whatever it is doing is viable and states are willing to pay. Instead, no, it is talking to Adani. Adani is doing the deals. Adani is meeting the discoms. Adani is arranging for them to do an about turn and buy power at higher prices, which will rip off Indian consumers in the long run. Without state agreements, there was going to be no big payoff and profit for Adani Green or Azure. In fact, the US government filings show that Azure was almost giving up until this bribery plan was apparently hatched. Now, let's come to the second angle, which is the power ministry. According to former Union Secretary E.A.S. Sarma, he's written a letter to the finance minister in which he says, the Ministry of Power has deliberately created scope for corruption in the solar sector by issuing directives under Section 11 of the Electricity Act 2003 to state power utilities to absorb a minimum of 10% of their power requirement, irrespective of cost, from centralized solar power plants set up by corporates like the Adani Group and foreign-based Azure, both specifically arraigned in the indictment. Again, not directly, through the central utility, SECI. He goes on to say that it's ironic that the power ministry should encourage corporates setting up large centralized solar plants in preference to decentralized systems like rooftop and solar-driven irrigation pump sets. In fact, centralized plants require high investment, operate on low load factors, have high transmission and delivery losses, and they lead to higher cost to the consumer, as is very clear from what is happening. According to Mr. Sarma, a review of the working of corporate solar plants during the past decade would make it clear that there was all-round political corruption revolving around the setting up of most of those plants. That is a very damning statement, and this is coming from someone very responsible. Another responsible person, former IAS officer Dr. P.V. Ramesh, has posted on X that in June 2019, Andhra Pradesh cancelled PPAs, power purchase agreements, involving 23 projects to generate 2,132 megawatts of power. The same government did an about turn and signed a PPA for 7,000 megawatts of solar power with SECI in December 2021. After Mr. Adani was in action, he specifically alludes to the role of two bureaucrats in engineering this deal. But there were meetings with the then chief minister as well, which is documented. Now, who should look at the role of bureaucrats? The Central Vigilance Commission. This is another central body which is conspicuous by its silence. So it is clear that nobody is investigating. The SECI is silent, Central Vigilance Commission is silent, the Power Ministry is silent. So we need an independent investigation into the policy of buying solar power, the machinations behind SECI, strange manufacturing-linked project contracts, which are designed to impose higher costs on the people of India as power consumers and enriching private companies. In all this, the role of powerful politicians, chief ministers, bureaucrats at the center, at SECI, at 5 state governments, and various distribution utilities also warrant serious investigation. So who is best suited to do this? When so many people are exposed by the US action, you need someone independent. So the US indictment on the way forward has naturally revived demands to investigate the Adani Group. This has been going on after the Hindenburg research report. There were Supreme Court cases. In fact, one advocate has revived his case and sought permission to place additional documents before the Supreme Court in a petition that was filed after the Hindenburg report. We don't know what the court is going to say. So that's part one. Part two, Congress Party and other opposition parties in Parliament, which opened yesterday, are demanding a joint parliamentary committee probe. Now, given the number of political parties involved, many of them are opposition states, I would say from past experience and covering JPCs for over 35 years that a JPC may end up with lots of drama, lots of media coverage, and finally in a damn squib with no clear evidence or conclusions. It has happened with the Ketan Parekh scam. In fact, some members begin to openly root or prevent questions on what is their vested interest. Now, a serious time-bound investigation is only possible, to my mind, if there is an independent judicial commission headed by a non-partisan judge. Yes, we have to say non-partisan judge today. And this is supported by a committee of officials from various investigation agencies, the tax department, enforcement, maybe CBI, maybe vigilance agencies, because they have ground level knowledge. Their inputs would be required. They need even maybe independent lawyers to be over there. And ideally, political parties should play the role of ensuring that the people chosen to be on this possible team and the judge who is selected are actually independent. That should be the limited role of political parties, to my mind. And only if there is such a independent judicial commission, we may get answers. And there should be a commitment, of course, to release that report finally in public. If you agree, please share this video, because this impacts all of us. This impacts each one of us as consumers of power, not necessarily in those 5 states, everywhere, because central utility. And do we want so much of bribery and corruption and international embarrassment? If you agree, please share this video. Thank you.